Welcome to Killer Bites, the show where we take you on a roller coaster of emotions while discussing the twists and turns of true crime stories. And today's story is an utterly tragic and mysterious disappearance. Today we'll be covering the case of Hannah Upp. Hannah Upp is or was a very special person. She was a school teacher, a traveler, and a bright beam of light to everyone that knew her. But what was so unique about Hannah in particular was that she has been missing a total of 3 times in her short yet colorful life. How is that possible? Let's get into it. So that is a true fact that Hannah Upp has been missing multiple times throughout her life. The first 2 times she was thankfully found, but after going missing in 2017, no one has been able to locate her. And if you thought ending up on a missing poster 3 times already sounds like a wild story, the reason for each disappearance was always the same, and always just as unbelievable. Hannah Upp suffers from a rare form of amnesia called dissociative fugue. Dissociative fugue is a condition where a person can completely forget their name and who they are while developing a strange urge to wander or escape elsewhere. Although this might be the first time you've heard of such a thing, this phenomenon is a legitimate disorder and dozens of cases have been reported all over the world, as well as throughout history. And listen, I get it. You're sitting there thinking, how can this be real? Skeptics think it's not a real disorder, or that sufferers are faking it. But while it might be difficult to wrap your head around, I ask you to just keep an open mind and just listen to Hannah's story, because after you hear it, you might even be worried about developing the condition yourself. I know that's how I felt when I first heard about this case. So the first time Hannah went missing was when she was living in New York in 2008. On August 28th, the 23-year-old left her apartment to go for a run, and that was the last thing she remembered. 3 weeks later, on September 16th, Hannah was found floating face down in the New York harbor, still wearing the athletic shorts and sports bra she'd left in. Miraculously, Hannah somehow survived, but barely, and had no idea where she'd been the past few weeks. Hannah claimed it was as if she left her apartment, blinked, and then the next thing she knew, she was being plucked out of the water with no idea how she got there. Can you imagine? Like, have you ever had surgery or been given anesthesia before? Because I feel like that's the closest thing I can relate Hannah's situation to. You're sitting there going, okay, I'm gonna see how long I could stay awake. 10, 9, 8, and then bam! Next thing you know, you're suddenly mid-conversation with a nurse named Stella who's changing your IV, saying your surgery was 2 hours ago. And you're like, wait, what? Hannah was going into her 2nd year as a middle school teacher. And as far as everyone knew, there was nothing going on in her life that would have led her to leave on her own accord. In fact, she disappeared the day before the start of the new school year. She wouldn't have dreamed of causing such an inconvenience to her students and fellow staff. At first, when Hannah didn't come back from her run, everyone thought she'd been kidnapped and feared the worst. All of her important things, including her phone, cash, purse, and credit cards, were left behind in her apartment. But when an old classmate of Hannah's spotted her 9 days later at an Apple store in Manhattan, that's when the investigation took a strange turn. The classmate claimed to have seen Hannah in the Apple store wearing a sports bra and running shorts, and her hair was in a ponytail as if she'd just gone out for a run, when in reality, she had. 9 days ago. Apparently, Hannah logged into her Gmail account while she was at the Apple store, and the acquaintance approached her and was like, are you the Hannah that everyone's been looking for? And Hannah was like, no, and just sort of wandered away, leaving the classmate really confused and concerned. The authorities were notified, as well as Hannah's family and friends, so literally everyone was chasing Hannah across the city, trying to catch her in places she'd allegedly been spotted, but always just a moment too late. She was spotted in a Starbucks, 5 different gyms and sports clubs where she used the showers, and the Apple store, and every single time, they missed her by that much. When Hannah's mom, Barbara, watched the surveillance footage of her daughter talking with her classmate in the Apple store, she said she could tell something was off right away. They checked the computer, and it didn't seem like Hannah had read or sent any emails after logging into it, and no one, including herself, knew what she was doing in there. The interesting question people bring up here is, if Hannah forgot who she was, then how was she able to log into her email? And honestly, she can't explain it, so neither can anyone else really. But people have, theories. So a lot of people think it was kind of like a muscle memory thing. Maybe somewhere in her cerebellum, her subconscious remembered that email and login. Kind of like how she still knew how to buy herself food and get around the city while she was in this dissociated state. Maybe her hands went to the keyboard and just did what they always did. Others believe that it was Hannah somewhere deep down in there just trying to remember who she was and to come out of this confused and disoriented state. And then there's the minority that thinks she was faking it and just checking her email when she accidentally got caught. But when you hear the condition she was found in, I highly doubt you'll think she'd willingly do this to herself. After Hannah was MIA for 20 days, a Staten Island ferry driver spotted her body floating in the water south of the Statue of Liberty. Officials initially thought they were pulling out a corpse, but to their disbelief, Hannah opened her eyes and coughed up some water, and they rushed her to the hospital. She was confused, distressed, dehydrated, sunburned, and hypothermic, but she was alive. Seriously, she had hours, maybe minutes left if someone hadn't found her. But that was only the beginning of a much more confusing and bizarre story. Friends and family came to visit Hannah at the hospital, but she didn't understand at all what happened to her or where she'd been. Legit, the first thing she asked her mom was, "Why am I wet?" She didn't seem to have any clue that 3 whole weeks had passed by. Police attempted to interview her, but their efforts were futile because she couldn't tell them diddly squat. The last thing she remembered was running near her apartment the day she went missing. Then she was in an ambulance. It was as if the last 3 weeks in her mind were just completely erased, and people were telling her all these things she'd been doing and places she had gone. But to Hannah, it felt like they were talking about a completely different person. It's almost like everything in her brain was there and working fine, but somehow one small switch in there just went boop, and whatever it was that made Hannah Hannah glitched. Like, how do you even describe it? After extensive testing and examination, Hannah was diagnosed with the rare psychological condition known as dissociative fugue. This is supposedly the type of amnesia that Jason Bourne was written to have, if you or your parents were ever into those movies. During moments of dissociation, patients will forget their identities and memories while getting that strong urge to escape. Some cases report patients fleeing countries and even continents during such episodes. Experts state the disorder is usually brought on by some form of trauma, stress, or PTSD-inducing event. But that's the thing, Hannah was like, "I don't think I've suffered any trauma." Neither did her friends or family that they could recall. Like, sure, she had trauma, but not like went to Vietnam trauma or grew up in poverty trauma. Nothing that would warrant such an intense condition like this. The only stress Hannah and her family could think of was that she was gearing up for a new school year, but they didn't think that would be enough to cause the fugue state. Hannah was obviously very upset and disturbed by the whole thing, and when asked by an interviewer if she felt guilty about what she'd done, she remarked, "How do you feel guilty for something you didn't even know you did?" Yeah, seriously, she's like, "Trust me, I want to know just as badly as you do." But Hannah recovered, life went back to normal, and she and her family all did their best to put this scary ordeal behind them. Hannah was doing fine, and sure enough, months went by without an incident. Months turned into a year, and then years, and it seemed as though things were going to be okay. In 2012, Hannah moved 200 miles away from New York and took a job as a teacher's aide at a school in Maryland. In September of 2013, the night before the first day of school, Barbara got the call that Hannah was once again missing. Hannah's purse and cell phone were found on a trail in the woods, and she apparently hadn't slept in her apartment the night before. Miraculously, Hannah was able to break out of the fugue state on her own this time. It was only 2 days later when Barbara answered a call from an unknown number and heard a shaky voice say, "Mom," on the other end. Hannah had been walking for more than 2 days before she suddenly snapped out of it and came to while sitting in a dirty creek, once again with no memory of how she made her way to the water. But now they could detect that the stress of a new school year was a factor, or at least one of the factors that triggered her fugue states. so they made a plan to watch Hannah's behavior more carefully around that time of year. But again, she'd had so many first day of schools before that were totally fine, where this sort of thing never happened. What gives? Hannah also hated the idea of being a liability issue and didn't want people constantly worrying about her all the time. Hannah's family members and doctors hoped that since Hannah was able to come out of it on her own this time, and only after 2 days, that maybe she could learn to control it or manage her stress to try to prevent it from happening again. It's not like there's a dissociative fugue for dummies manual out there, so everyone was just trying to figure it out as they went. Despite this terrifying ordeal happening twice now, Hannah was really set on living life as normal as possible. She didn't want to be watched all the time or monitored like an animal. She just wanted to be an independent adult and live her life. Hannah's doctors and her mom tried to come up with solutions about what to do if she disappeared again, and they were like, we could give you a house arrest ankle bracelet? But Hannah thought that was way over the top, and she couldn't imagine trying to explain to people why she had it in the first place. She didn't like the idea of people knowing about her condition, looking at her differently, or pitying her. And I totally get that. No one wants to be a burden. But I really wish they had figured something out sooner, because when Hannah unfortunately disappeared for the 3rd time, she was never found. In September of 2017, Hannah, who was then 32, was preparing again for the start of a new school year. This time, her job led her to working on an island in the Caribbean called St. Thomas. She'd been there for around 3 years now and totally fit in with the island life. Hannah's friends said she was a vibrant member of the community and was involved with dancing, swimming, and Zumba while keeping up an active social life. Her best friend Maggie joked it was almost hard to be Hannah's friend because she was so high energy that she was hard to keep up with. But trouble was on the horizon when Hurricane Irma hit the island with an unrelenting ferocity. 185-mile-per-hour winds battered homes and decimated communities. In the days leading up to the hurricane, Maggie remembered that Hannah wasn't acting like herself. Her closest friends and co-workers on the island knew of her amnesia and were keeping an eye on her. But Hannah communicated with her friends and family throughout the duration of Hurricane Irma, letting them know she was fine, and it felt like they were in the clear, but not quite yet. A second, more powerful hurricane was headed for the island, and people were beginning to flee and take cover. Fortunately, the news about the second storm had already broken, so many people had time to get off the island if they were able to. But Hannah said she was staying where her heart was, and refused to leave her beloved home behind. On September 14th, a few days after the first hurricane, and only a few before the next, Hannah missed a staff meeting at school. She was last seen leaving her house around 8 a.m. for a swim. After that, she disappeared. Friends prayed that what they thought was happening wasn't actually happening, and ran to her favorite beach to see if she was there. They found Hannah's sandals, dress, and keys on the stool of a bar nearby, and the workers said they'd found the items in the sand earlier. Her car was in the parking lot with her wallet, cell phone, and passport still inside. Friends and police frantically checked the marinas, shores, hospitals, airports, homeless shelters, and morgues, but there was no trace of her. Since that day, Hannah's case has remained unsolved, and no new evidence has turned up. Barbara ended up moving to St. Thomas to be closer to the search and believes that Hannah could still be out there wandering the island in a fugue state to this day. Others, unfortunately, haven't remained as hopeful. While a Facebook page dedicated to finding Hannah Upp was created back in 2017, the page has since become mostly inactive. With people having once referred to Hannah in the present tense on the page, they've slowly switched over to the past, indicating little hope they have of her still being alive. Some people, like Barbara, believe Hannah might still be wandering the untouched regions of St. Thomas, while others have speculated she could have taken a boat to a nearby island or Miami. But many believe in her fugue state, Hannah returned to the water where she was swept away by the strong current or lost in the hurricane. An adult skeleton washed ashore on a remote island of St. Thomas in September of 2018, but unfortunately it was so badly corroded that they weren't able to identify if it was Hannah or not. The most recent unconfirmed sighting of Hannah came in February of 2019, when a woman resembling Hannah was spotted walking the beaches of St. Croix, but there was never a follow-up, and that was the last post made to the Facebook page, at least as of fall 2021. Barbara, family, and friends won't give up hope of one day finding Hannah, and since her disappearance, several documentaries and news specials have been made about her case. While Hannah might be one of the first people you've heard of who deals with this form of amnesia, she certainly isn't the only one. It would explain some of the other mysterious disappearances we've covered on the show that just seem to make no sense. Well, that's all for this story. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.